Welcome back to another episode of Complete Human Performance Radio. I am your host, Anthony Durazio, and today I am joined by nobody. It's just me today. I know this is if you're excited to hear this on November 1st, 2022. I apologize. It is a couple days late. I actually wanted to wait until the Crucible finished, which you could get scores in late the 31st, actually past midnight my time the 1st because I'm on East Coast time here in the US. And then I had some stuff going on the next 2 days. So it took me a day or two to record this after getting the scores in. Now, they aren't finalized. So when I discuss the Crucible here in a minute, I'm just going to talk generalities because we haven't sort of reviewed everything and reviewed all the lists that everyone's done, reviewed all the data. So I'm going to give just sort of generalities and trends in my own sense. So today I want to talk about three topics. The Crucible, sort of what we've seen compared to last year, and how things have progressed, how the athletes have progressed, my experience with it, year two. I want to talk about, there was an article in the Washington Post that came out about abuse of power in female bodybuilding. Female bodybuilding, I'm using loosely there, female physique competitions in the NPC and IFBB. And then the third and final thing I want to talk about was I attended the EliteFTS Symposium, SWIS Symposium, this past weekend. I thought I'd give my 2 cents on having attended that for the first time. So hopefully you hear something in this episode for you to either hear or listen to or get something out of. So let's start with the Crucible. So this is year 2 of the Crucible. So obviously, we've talked about it quite a bit here on the podcast for good reason. We view it as a excellent demonstration of hybrid fitness. There are many ways, obviously, to define hybrid fitness or athleticism, however you want to think about it. CrossFit does a great job with the way they do things. They do approach it a little bit differently. We specifically, as we just talked about last year when we first announced the Crucible, built it such that it's meant to be pretty low skill cap. We don't have many technical movements that you would want to expect people to be able to kind of pick up at least decently quickly. Yes, that's not to say there's no technical movements. Obviously, the clean and jerk, snatch are part of the super total, and the kettlebell long cycle certainly is, as I will talk about, not a skill-free exercise or movement. But I think many people, myself excluded here, tend to pick that up pretty quickly. So the only major change we made from year 1 to year 2, really the only change we made, was that we altered the time of the Wingate / row, because you can do a row in place of a Wingate, from 30 seconds to 2 minutes for kickout's. So that, other than that, though, everything else remained the same, right? So it's still super total. It's still 6 hour for the pro division, still 6 hour foot race. Still for at least the males, the pro men, it's a 32 kilogram kettlebell, 71 pounds, and everything else stayed the same. Okay, so looking at the pro men, just to give you some idea of where things were last year in terms of our top athletes and where things were with our top athletes this year. I'm going to sort of go through the individual events and give, kind of ranges of where we're seeing things for the pro men. So last year, we'll start with the 6 hour foot race. Alec Blennis, CHP coach, we've had him on a couple times, or at least once, maybe I think twice. We certainly had him on after he won last year. But he had the longest score last year. He went just over 40 miles last year. And if we look at people over 30 last year in the pro men division, we had, I counted up 1, 2, 3, 4 people were over 30. Well, 5 if you include Alec. So 4 were between 30 and 39.999. But one of those is, a 30.9, so it's not at 31. I say that like that's not far. It's incredibly far. Only I think one of those is above 35. Glancing real quick, yeah, 2 of them are under 31. right? So, obviously really good distances last year for the pro men, but not hugely far. And actually, as I look, one of those was actually a bike. So, only really 4 total runs over 30 miles last year. If you compare that to this year, let's look here. Now, our longest run wasn't as long, right? Now, Alec did not compete this year, but our longest run was around mid 30s, right? About 35 miles. But even with that said, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people over 30 miles this year. All right, so the bar has been set, and that's just setting the stage for some of these events, right? So the bar definitely got raised this year. A similar number of competitors, right? If you're worried, like, oh, the number of competitors is way, way higher this year. No, it's pretty similar. It's actually really similar number of competitors, right? If anything, there might actually be slightly fewer people that submitted a score this year. We did have a few people that were signed up that did not submit scores. Obviously, that life happens, right? So I don't know why people didn't submit scores, but life happens. People get injured, hurt, sick, right? You sign up and then stuff happens. So no, if you're a person that falls in that category, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. But I think because of that, we end up with like maybe slightly fewer people that actually submitted stuff this year than last year. But really, really good turnout on the run portion. So this is the pro men. So 6 hours, we're getting all these guys over 30 miles. Then there was kind of, if I'm looking at the, there were a few kind of mid 20s. And then a few that were a lot lower. So that was the run. If we look at the half marathon, the kettlebell long cycle, the 30-minute half marathon, this year, a lot of people up over 100 plus reps, or I would say, let's say 80 plus reps. We've got a couple people over 100, quite a few. And the person that has the highest score, again, we haven't reviewed anything, but the highest score is over 200 this year. If we look at last year, we are looking at, let me make sure I see what we got here. Apologies, I have to find it real quick. Last year, again, the winner last year was 200s. So really similar score to win. But, there was like the next score was just over 100 last year. And then there's a drop to 80, and then a bunch of people kind of sub 80. Whereas this year we had quite a few that were, 80 plus. So better on the kettlebell long cycle, definite improvements there. Again, I wouldn't say it's the most common exercise for most people in the gym. Certainly not for me. And then let me pull up, this is website's being strange. If we look at the super total, right? So the super total last year, let me find this. Super total last year, let's see, the pro men, we're looking at the highest was mid eights, kind of mid eights, we'll call it. And then there were, everything else was below 800 kilograms. So, a couple people, one person in the high 7s, another person kind of in the low to mid 7s, right? Like 7.25. And then a good number of people in the 600s, right? And then quite a few that are down in the 500s, right? So kind of spread out anywhere between 500 something. On average, there's one or two maybe lower than that, but 500 up to mid 8s last year. This year, we have a couple that are mid to high 8s that are probably battling out for the lead. Again, without having reviewed the videos, can't be sure if they all count, but mid to high 8s. And then there are multiple people that are up in that range, which is just a tremendous super total, just tremendously high. A a few that are in the sort of mid to high sevens, right? There's a chunk of people kind of in that range. There's a chunk of people, let me see, looking here, kind of in the, let me sort this. Yeah, kind of like low to mid sixes. And then there's another chunk kind of in the high fives, right? So kind of there's like three distinct chunks, I would say. You have the sort of super high, like mid eights to nine, sort of next still really high, sort of mid sevens to high sevens. Then kind of like a big chunk between like 610 and 670, and then another chunk between like 575 and just about 600. Right, so kind of four chunks there. Obviously, all really good super totals, but definitely a lot stronger than last year for the people that submitted scores. I'm not going to talk about the Wingate just because we did change the scoring there and how that worked. But this was pretty, across the board. I know I'm just talking about the pro men here, but since that's the sort of heaviest weight and longest distances, it makes sense. But we saw similar patterns in the scaled men's, where people got stronger and kind of faster. Just to give you an idea on what we're seeing, in case you're thinking about doing this next year, and you're like, well, I don't want to like embarrass yourself. Well, one, I would say don't worry about it. Like, we're all here to get better. That's the point of it. And also, I think especially if you're not sure, the scaled version is a really good option because it's much more doable, right? I mean, for the pro division, telling someone to go do a 6-hour foot race, it's just a long time, right? It is just extremely long time to be out there, by yourself. In my case, I don't wear headphones. I don't listen to anything when I run. I just loan my thoughts. So 6 hours being in my own head, it gets old, right? Especially the last couple hours when everything hurts and you're not having that much fun anymore. But in the scaled version, that drops to 2 hours. And so it's a lot more manageable. And I think most people can walk for 2 hours, like if nothing else, right? You can walk, ride a bike for 2 hours. It's much more on par with a sort of non-endurance athlete's ability to do very low cardio, right? If you tell someone to just go walk for 6 hours, things start to fail that you wouldn't expect. Like glutes start to fail, like shins start to hurt, Achilles might start to hurt, like things if you're not used to doing anything near that time domain, things will start to hurt. And so it becomes very difficult to get out to like marathon distance in that sort of time frame if you haven't trained. Even though you might say it's like, oh, it's only like 4.5 miles per hour. Well, yeah, but how often are you going 4.5 miles per hour for 6 hours? Not if you're not an endurance athlete, never. So the scaled version, we're seeing anything from, for the men here, anything from between 6 and 14 miles. Right, so kind of like half marathon or just short of half marathon range. And you're like right in the ballpark of what we're seeing for the scaled men. Half marathon, we actually had a sort of low 200 score here in the the kettlebell half marathon, the long cycle. So that would have been really this would have been, as of just taking the score as it is, would be second place in the men's open, right? Now, granted, this is a lighter weight, right? So we are using a lighter weight here. So this is the other change between the scaled and the pro men, is that the scaled, I think it's a 53-pound kettlebell, whatever that is in kilograms. I think it's 24 kilograms. So it is a lighter kettlebell here on the scaled version. That's the other reason this is a lot more doable, because it's, at least for me personally, I think I'm of average strength, and I dealing with it's a 24 kilogram kettlebell. The 24 kilogram kettlebell is just a lot easier than the 32 kilogram kettlebell. It's just a lot more manageable without having not done a lot of kettlebell work. Like I can manage the 24 pretty well. The 32, I just don't manage it that well. I can't get away. My lack of technique really shows up with a heavier kettlebell. All right. So even that said, we're looking at like, kind of, it's all over the map, but I would say, if you're in the 50 to 100 reps, you're kind of in the mix here. And then the super total, again, because the super total is just a super total, this doesn't change between, any of the divisions. It's super total, right? It's your bench, squat, deadlift, clean and jerk, and snatch all just totaled together. Again, we were kind of a big mix. Obviously, the weights are just a little bit lighter here. So you see anything from, about 500 kilograms up to mid sevens, right? For the scale, or actually, yeah. So fours to mid sevens, right? So a decent range here. And, certainly one that you could probably get into with some decent training, right? So hopefully that gives you, let me, I guess, talk about the women real quick. So our pro female division, just to give you an idea very quickly of the sort of ranges we're seeing for things. So we didn't have as many competitors for either female division, but for the endurance, again, we have a kind of clump around 20 miles, and then we have a clump at the mid 30s, right? So females getting out there just as far as the males, kind of not surprisingly, honestly. I forget the weight that the female kettlebell is. I apologize. But we've got one athlete that crushed it in mid 200s and basically went the full time almost all 30 minutes. And the other athletes, just a few reps. So anything would have done there. And then super total, mid threes to kind of lowish fives, right? So, very, very strong, some very, very strong, scores there. And, even our lowest score is still a really good score. I'm sure they're very proud, as they should be, right? They're all good scores, right? For the scaled female division, endurance, again, kind of same range as the males, kind of between 8 and 14 miles again. So exact same range as the males we're seeing here. Half marathon, again, in this case, it is a lighter kettlebell again, in this case for the women compared to the pro women's division. And we have between, high to mid E's, less than 100, but, between like 50 and 80, up to like 300 plus, right? So one person went the entire 30 minutes, used up all the time, right? And then super total here is mid twos to kind of mid threes, right? So I say that again, not to, make you feel good or bad about where you are, but more just to give you an idea if you're thinking about competing, and you're scared. I know competitions can be scared, especially new ones, or something, as different as the Crucible, where it's mixing so many different modalities. How do you deal with that? Are you going to feel very out of place? No, you shouldn't, right? We have, pretty big ranges. You can definitely, I would recommend doing the scale division if you're not used to handling a heavier kettlebell or going, for near 6 hours at a time on endurance work, or at least multiple hours. So yeah, if you're thinking about it, it sort of gives you a range. It also hopefully gives you an idea, at least for the pro men, because that's what I'm focused on, how the athletes have evolved to deal with this challenge in a single year, right? And sort of, obviously there's selection bias here. We're certainly not getting a random sample, and as our name hopefully has gotten out there more, and hopefully you all are, spreading the CHP gospel as much as we would hope you're doing that. We've recruited better athletes to these competitions, and we hope that continues, right? We know we do have people that repeated it both years. I know one of my clients did it both years. And he's older than me, so he's in low to mid 40s. He knows who he is if he's listening to this. And he's improved, right? So I know he PR'd his deadlift. I think we PR'd his bench too. So, he really crushed it. So shout out to him. I don't want to say his name because I don't know if he wants to be named. But that's in his early to mid 40s. He's PR and stuff on this. So it's a great thing to train for and sort of set up your training cycle to do. I said I would give a few thoughts on my own thoughts on having to do the Crucible myself and sort of how it differed maybe from last year. I have mixed feelings, I guess is the best way to put it. I went in really excited. So the way I approached it was, I wanted to do my strength work right away, sort of as soon as I possibly could. Do the foot race in the middle of the month, and then, if I wanted to retest anything, do it again. I would give me enough time to maybe do it later in the month. So my own experience, I went in, I think I did the bench and the squat October 1st. Like literally that morning, I think I got up and did the squat, and then we actually went to a Renaissance festival. I came home and I did the bench, and those went really well. And part of the reason I wanted to get them over was this training was going so well, and I was worried that my joints would I'm 40 years old, so I was worried my joints wouldn't hold up if I kept pushing the weight I was pushing, because especially on bench, I tend to lock up if I do too much heavy bench work. So I was worried about that happening, and so I wanted to get it done. For that reason, the reasons I mentioned. So those went really well. I improved by like 28 pounds on bench and 30 pounds on squat, basically, since last year. My squat is terrible. I won't talk about that, but the bench I was decently proud of given my injury history there. So that went well. Then my deadlift went well, I think a day or two later, which tied my all-time max, but I pulled that in straps. So it is my all-time max pulling with just, just my hands. I did cheat and use lifters for my squats, and I did not wear them for my deadlifts because I don't wear my deadlifts. But my squats, I do cheat and wear squat shoes because my dorsiflexion is terrible. As I've gotten older, it's gotten worse. But I was happy because I don't wear a belt for anything. I don't wear knee wraps there's nothing on my knees. Like I wear shorts and a t-shirt. So I basically wander in off the street. That's the way I approach lifting. If you have to put on a belt, like what's the point, in my opinion? That's my personal opinion. There's good reasons to have a belt if you're competing for a real thing, and for other reasons. But for me personally, like I don't want to ever have to be asked to lift something. Be like, wait, hold on, let me go get my belt, my knee wraps. Feels disingenuous. It's also the reason I don't like pulling why I pull conventional. Right? Pick this up, but make sure you can actually step forward. So those went well. And then after that, it was kind of downhill. Not in the sense of my performances. My performances actually were strong. I improved on everything compared to last year. But it was downhill in terms of my mental interest in doing the event. And I think part of this is the nature of having a month to do an event, is that you have so much time to do something, do everything, right? You always feel like you can, I didn't get the score I wanted. Should I retest? Right? That always kind of lingers. Should I be retesting this? And for me, because of all the testing, it was throwing off my own personal training, right? Many of these events I don't really like training for. I don't personally, poor Ross, who did our videos for the kettlebell long cycle. And a special shout out to Ross because he did help me with my kettlebell long cycle. I was not giving him much to work with, I'll be honest, in terms of my form. But he did the best he could to help me in a very short time period. So thanks to him. Ross Gilbert. He's on OpenSide_7, I think. I'll put his Instagram in the description. So go follow him on Instagram. He's great if you want to follow strength and especially long cycle stuff, kettlebell stuff. So shout out to him. But I don't like training for the long cycle. It's not something, for me, it's a very clumsy movement. I, make it just, because it's overhead and I come from a bodybuilding background. For me, having come from that background, anything that goes overhead is a shoulder movement, right? So I focus on using my shoulders. Well, this is great if you're training for hypertrophy. It is idiotic if your goal is to do as many reps as possible with a given weight, because it's super inefficient, like most bodybuilding movements are. So this is what happened on the kettlebell long cycle. So even though last year I didn't even attempt it because I didn't bother training for it and knew I wasn't going to do anything, I'd probably get like half a rep. This year I did it, managed to get like 9 reps, which is still horrible. But given that it was basically 9 just straight side out shoulder presses, which is a 32 kilogram kettlebell, I can't be too mad, right? There's very little transfer of power from my hips, up to above my head, like none. So that was just frustrating. And then the snatch and clean and jerk, I think I tried testing like 3 times. Because I was just really having real trouble with them. And again, those are movements they're kind of fun to train for because they're so different from bodybuilding, which is how I like to train. But also because I'm so limited by my technique, they're also very frustrating. So again, I improved there, but I am extremely limited by my technique. I think I retested the clean and jerk the very last October 31st because I forgot to step through on it, the one I recorded. So here we do that one. And then the last thing, the wing gate, I didn't even do on a wing gate. I just jumped on it. I don't have easy access to a wing gate, so I just jumped on some random rower, which meant I was going to get fewer kcals, which whatever. Didn't care. I just wanted to score. And then lastly, the 6-hour foot race, which this is the one I probably had the most. I have the most mixed feelings about having done. So I went last year, just for context, I went 17 miles, which is terrible. But I did effectively zero training for 3 months for it. Did not do a single run for 3 months, or at least 2 months training, type of training, quote unquote. Was this year actually trained? I did 3 months training, started in July, hadn't run between January and July of 2022. So basically I went from nothing to 27 miles, which is what I did for the 6 hours in 3 months of training. Now, is that doable for everyone? No, because I do come from, in high school, which was 20 plus years ago at this point. I was a cross country athlete. It wasn't great, but I was decent. I was mediocre. Let's call it that. But my body knows how to respond to running. It responds to running much better than it responds to weight training, to be honest. But such is life. You love the things that you tend to not take to. And so one of the things I ran into was, I was very happy with my approach. I made few mistakes in terms of the actual day of the testing day. There were some mistakes I made, but I don't think they greatly affected my final distance. I probably would have gotten maybe a mile more max. Not enough to really make a difference. The issue I had was that it felt very hollow, right? So I pushed out to 27, and my goals were staggered. I had different goals for it. Like one was go further than last year, which, given the training I had done, which I had only got up to 12 miles in training, but that was, again, way more than I did last year, which was 0. So goal 1 was get past 17, which was easy. Goal 2 was hit 20, pretty easy. Goal 3 was marathon distance, which I knew it would be hard, but I was like, if I stay on pace, I should do it. And then sort of super stretch goal was like, if I magically felt amazing, 50K, right? So at 3, and that's sort of like the 3, what I thought were like the 3 actual feasible goals. And the thing though was, like, I was talking to someone at SWIS, actually. I was telling someone about this, and that, if I could relate it to strength training, right, and say like it's a bench press. Let's say you could do 225 for 10 reps, right? And the question someone asked you, can you bench 250? The answer is yes, right? Like, unless you have like the weirdest strength curve in the world, right? You can bench 250, right? Do you really need to go and do it, right? If that makes sense. I thought of to sort of another example, because I don't know if what I'm trying to get across is, I don't know. I don't think I'm articulating this as well as I wish I could. But if you watch the movie Hero with Jet Li, it's an older movie, but those of us my age may have seen it if you like sort of martial arts movies. But in one part of that movie, him and his adversary don't actually, they're supposed to fight, but they don't actually fight. They like fight in their mind, right? And then like they each are kind of imagining the scenario, what would play out if they did fight. And they both kind of figure out who's going to win, right? And then they don't fight because it's pointless. They know who's going to win the fight. That also happens, I think, in that Sherlock Holmes movie with Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, right? Or at least it's very similar to that. They actually do have a little scuffle after that, but the first part of it is all in their mind. So, that's kind of how I felt once I got past, like 23 miles. I was like, well, at that point I knew I was going to hit 20. I would hit the marathon because I was walking at that point, but I knew my walking pace would get me there. And, it was like, it became pointless. I was like, I'm ruining my day, right? Because I knew I was going to be wrecked from the day. My training, I wasn't going to be able to train anything else for that day. And functionally, I wasn't going to get really any work done that day. For something that means nothing. Like, it didn't mean anything to me, right? Like, is it cool to say, yes, I can finally say that, yes, I've gone marathon distance. I mean, maybe my time isn't good enough for you to consider that I went marathon distance fast enough. Cool, that's fine. Everyone has their standard. But most marathons, cutoff's like 6 or 6.5 hours, so I'm going to count it. But does it change my life? No. Did it feel like a waste of my day? Yes. Like, it absolutely did. So I say that knowing full well that next year I'll probably try and do 30. Right? And I'll probably feel very similar. I'll probably, if I go out and do it, I'll probably, again, feel like I wasted my day. So I don't know what that means, to be honest. I'm more sharing because I think other people probably have similar feelings after different events in their lives, right, or different athletic events, right, where you expect, not that I expected it to feel any different than like a 12-mile run or a 10-mile run or 8-mile run in terms of like how accomplished I felt afterwards. But it, I think I was just more like annoyed, I guess is the best way to put it. Like slightly annoyed that it took away the rest of my day, right? For something I didn't really care about, right? So that was my pre-Crucible experience. Feel free to share yours, right? I'd love to hear. Hopefully it's less depressing than what I just shared. But yeah, overall it was good. Like I improved on everything, so I'm glad I had something to train for. I think that's one of the big things it gives you something to train for. And it sort of gives you a mark on the calendar to check improvement, see weak areas, see where you may need to improve, and sort of go from there. So I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad it's no longer October, and I no longer feel this pressure like, oh, should I be retesting something, or do I have to like worry about my recovery because I am planning on testing something in a couple days. So that's topic number one. Topic number two, as I mentioned, the Washington Post published something in the last week. So this got published. Let me see if they actually have the publication dates. October 28th, it got updated. It originally got published October 25th, 2022. And it's entitled Female Bodybuilders Describe Widespread Sexual Exploitation. It's on the Washington Post website. And, I just wanted to bring it up. I know this isn't our main audience here, but I think it highlights a couple more important issues. Basically, the article is talking about specifically the NPC and IFBB. All right, so the NPC is sort of the feeder amateur organization that leads to the IFBB, which is the pro kind of bodybuilder / physique organization, the main one in the world, but mostly the U.S. Right, there are other pro physique division organizations out there, but this is the IFBB is the big one. Like when they talk about Mr. Olympia, that's an IFBB show, right? And the accusations here are that the people that run this, the Mannion family and others that run these organizations, have been exploiting competitors, specifically female competitors. And this is stuff that if you've been in this world, you hear whispers about it. But this really puts it in the spotlight, and I think it's important for females, if you're entering the sport, to be on guard for a couple reasons. You need to be on guard because of things like this, right? I'm never going to begrudge someone to wanting to look a certain way, right? Whatever that way is. Right, it is your body at the end of the day, and you are, fit to choose to do with it what you want, within reason. Right, it's your body. Like I shouldn't tell you have to look a certain way. Right, so if you really want to, chase a bikini or figure or women's physique or women's bodybuilding type of, body, more power to you. You need to be on the lookout because this is, unfortunately, particularly these organizations are run by men. And men that apparently, based on this article, don't have qualms about taking advantage of their positions of power. Right? Now, as anyone that has a position of power, I think it's it's very easy to forget sometimes, I think, that you do have power over someone. If you are judging them, if you're a boss, if you are in some position of power, it can be easy to forget that when you ask for something, right, you're not just, even if you mean it as asking, like as a friend, asking as just a colleague, right, not as a boss, but as a colleague, right, it doesn't come off that way to the person you're asking if you are in a relative position of power. Right? It can very much be like, oh, this might be my career or my placing or whatnot, if I don't, do what this person says. Right? So, I think all of us have a responsibility, especially us men, have a responsibility to be better about just that in general, like not talking about bodybuilding, just that in general, right? And then specifically in regards to this, not being like slime ball scum, right? Like that's basically what this article is laying out, is what these guys were being. So I would highly advise female competitors to be on the lookout for this and understand that it happens, right? This article clearly lays out that it does. And understand that, it's like, does your placing matter? Should that matter so much to you, right? And what, why does it mean so much if it does, right? The other thing I'll say is that this article doesn't really get into this portion of it, but it touches on it. Like it kind of, if you're kind of looking through the leaves, it kind of touches on it. Is the coaching for female athletes in physique sports. I was talking with a friend of mine recently who is a female athlete in physique sports, very high level. And we were talking about her experiences. And, something that came up, is that coaches, the what is good for the coach and what is best for them is not what's best for the athlete in terms of long-term health, right? They are not in mutual alignment with one another. So if an athlete comes to them, right, the athlete might want to, look as good as they can and win, the competition. But, I would tell them, okay, we're going to try and get you as good as we can get you. Winning in physique sport is so subjective, especially for the women. Won't get into why, but it's usually much harder. I find, and most others would probably, I think, agree with me that it's harder to judge the women than judge the men. It's a bit more subjective. It's subjective across the board, but it's a bit more subjective for the women. I think most people would agree. And depending on who shows up, you might not have any chance of winning. Just given, depending on what your genetic structure is and whatnot. This applies across the board, men and women. But we want to do all this stuff in the context of relative long-term health, right? Not doing too much damage. And I think that should be the goal for the athlete, right? Is how can I look as good as possible without doing minimal long-term damage, right? There's very few ways, to get down extremely low body fat and push yourself as hard as bodybuilders, physique athletes are going to want to step on stage in very little clothing. That probably is, not the healthiest. Even natural competitors, particularly men, you get to really low body fats in women, right? Men, you're gonna nuke your testosterone production, right? Your androgens are going to get crushed. You talk to natural bodybuilders that are truly natural and ask them like what their libido is, and the answer is 0. They don't have one, right? I've been there. I've done it. It's, it just is what it is. You just kind of accept it, right? And the goal is then like, okay, once you do your competitions, trying to get, add back some body fats just to try and get that back to normal. Same thing with female athletes, right? Obviously, you get to below a certain body fat percentage, right? You stop menstruating, right? It's not good, right? So there are some. I would say most athletes are willing to make some minor trade-offs for short periods of time. I certainly was, but long-term health should still, in my opinion, be a goal. And when I was talking with my friend, this physique athlete, we were discussing how when they had a coach for physique, the coach was very much pressing more compounds, more exogenous compounds to take, and doing very wacky stuff with their diets. That was probably unnecessary. And this is because, from the coach's perspective, right, long-term health really isn't in their best interest, right? Their reputation is going to be based on how do their athletes place, right? And how do their athletes look, right? And that's going to get them more clients and more athletes to work with, which keeps their business going, right? So they don't. Again, you can see here how now what's beneficial for the athlete is not necessarily what's beneficial to the coach, right? And they're not in mutual alignment, right? And when you're a female athlete, if you're working with a male coach in particular, and you're dieted down, it can get very easy to get bullied into doing stuff that you don't want to do, because when you're dieted down, you don't necessarily think straight. Like, especially if you have like really low, carb days and you're not particularly used to them, or you're just really low. Like anyone that's been super low body fat, that's had days where they're really low calories, like it's just you don't function well at all. I'm not saying that's good, and I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but this happens. It gets you don't want to fight, right? Or you're not good at fighting. Let's put it that way, or arguing. So it gets easy to get bullied, right? So if you are an athlete, again, I'll say it applies to everyone, but specifically for female athletes, I think a little bit more than male athletes. Stick to your guns, right? If you tell your coach you're not comfortable doing certain things, whether that's getting below a certain body fat, or giving up menstruation, or taking certain compounds or diuretics, stick to those guns, right? I would say, tell someone else that's outside of the coaching circle to make sure you stick to those guns, right? Because it can be easy to get bullied, right? And so, tell a loved one that, supports you in general for what you're doing, and tell them, hey, make sure I don't do, I really don't want to do X, Y, Z. I'm starting my prep. Like, you make sure I don't get pushed into doing X, Y, Z. Having like a check and balance there, right? It could be, a spouse, a partner, whatever. It can be a very good thing, right? So just be on the lookout, fight for yourself. You're not wrong for not wanting to push beyond a certain threshold or point, right? Everyone has their limits, right? And like, yes, there are limits that can be tested and pushed, like how strong you are, how fast you are. Like, those are things that you should push, right? How much money you can make, right? Those are things we should push. But, those types of limits that are risking your health, risking your potentially mental well-being, right? Certain compounds people don't react well to, and their mental health can be challenged, right? Are not limits you should have to feel like you should be pushed past, right? Because someone's bullying you and they feel like their reputation's on the line, right? They are, in my opinion, a bad coach for doing that, right? They're a coach that doesn't care about you, right? So, find a coach that does. Find a coach that's willing to take a more holistic approach to your health and well-being, and view your athletic endeavors as part of your entire life, not just this is the only thing you should be doing, and all that matters is what you place on this day. So those are my 2 cents there. I urge you to read the article on the Washington Post website. I think you have free access. Like, I haven't paid anything. I've had free access, so assume it's free. Again, it's called Female Bodybuilders Describe Widespread Sexual Exploitation on WashingtonPost.com. Okay. And then the final thing I wanted to mention was just my experience at the EliteFTS SWIS Symposium. That was in Columbus in October 28th to 29th, 2022. So it's been here for a while, but this is my first year I went. It was great. It was a lot of fun. It's very strength. It's specifically meant for strength coaching, strength athletes in rehab. So obviously, I mean, there's multiple talks going on at any given time. So you're certainly not going to see everything. But I was very pleased with the talks I did go see, and learned quite a bit that hopefully I'll be able to utilize with my clients. So I'm excited about that. But I will say this. So it's, if you're thinking about attending in the future, whether it's online, virtually, because I do have it, at least this year, certainly they had a virtual, ticket you could attend online, or you can attend in person. I attended in person because it was here in Columbus. what I would say is it's extremely strength focused, right? And so if you're coming in expecting any sort of, given the audience we have for this podcast, right, a more hybrid methodology, that you're not going to get that, right? I did go to one talk where this is given by Josh Bryant. It was a good talk. He was talking about one of the athletes he works with. The guy was super impressive. He was, rucking and lifting absurd amounts of weight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this is knowing your audience and how audiences can vary very differently from one another. And so as he's giving this talk, he mentions that he has this athlete doing tempo runs, right? Or tempo repeats, I think he said. Tempo. He used the term run. I know he used the word run. So I think he said tempo runs. And I'm like, oh, maybe he's got him doing like 1 mile repeats or something like that, or 2 to 5 mile tempo run or whatever, something like that. He was talking about 100-meter or yard or meter repeats, right? Which yes is running, but no one would ever call that running in the context of like a hybrid audience or an endurance audience. Right? Everyone will call that sprint work. Right. So it was very interesting to get that approach, and hear that emphasis, how differently other groups think about endurance work and running. Steffi Cohen gave a talk, and she is, she's one of the more accomplished female powerlifters of all time, but she's since transitioned to, sorry, I should say Dr. Steffi Cohen. My apologies to her. But she gave a talk on deadlift because she's got all these records in deadlifts and other powerlifting events, but she's since transitioned to boxing the last 2 years, I believe. And she mentioned toward the very end of her talk that she's like, oh, I haven't actually, I only lift like 2 days a week and I haven't really lost that much strength despite all the cardiovascular work I've been doing with all the boxing, to which all of you and myself went, unsurprising. Right? Given everything we see, given everything I just talked about with our Crucible athletes, people running 30 plus miles and, super totaling well into the 800 kilogram range, you can certainly do both very well. Maybe not, world class at, either at the same time if you're doing both, but you can do pretty darn well, right? Even if you don't have the best genetics for either, you can do decent, right? You can improve in both. So yeah, overall, I would say, if you have an interest in strength, go. It is very well attended. Lots of people, lots of connections to make. I ran into a couple people I know or have met before, so it was good to see them. Met some new people. I will hopefully be having on our next podcast. Should have one of the speakers on from the conference, so I'm very excited about that. Someone I know, but I'll leave that a surprise. Maybe follow our Instagram. I might throw up a little question if you have any questions for this person, so I'll give it away. But yeah, so I would recommend attending because there's probably something for everyone there, whether it's more rehab focused, nutrition focused, training focused. All right, they have all these different categories, so lots of fun, lots of good talks, lots of information. So that's going to do it for this month's podcast. Obviously, follow us on Instagram at Complete Human Performance. You can follow me on Instagram at Durazio Anthony when I decide to post. Yeah, which is I try to make once a week, but sometimes I miss a week. You can purchase coaching, templates, one-on-one coaching, whatever, nutrition coaching through the links below. That'll all be below. Yeah, and if you have any questions, you can, of course, DM us on Instagram or email me at anthony@hybrid-academy.com. All right, so anthony@hybrid-academy.com. Email me there, and I will see you next time. Take care, everyone.